Filipinas, Mexico, y otras partes del mundo. Welcome to the second episode of La Historia Olvidada, Filipinas-Mexico 2023. To the new participants, La Historia Olvidada is a virtual colloquium series on the historical, cultural, and diplomatic ties between the Philippines and Mexico, organized by the Philippine Embassy in Mexico in partnership with the Department of History of the University of the Philippines, the El Colegio de San Luis, and the Philippine-Mexico Studies Program of La Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, or UNAM. If you missed its launching episode, you can watch it via the YouTube channel of the Philippine Embassy. We will post it later in the chat box. I am Crystal Obispado from the UP Department of History, and I will be your moderator for this session. Before we start, we would like to remind our attendees of the following guidelines for this session. Video cameras and microphones of attendees on Zoom should be disabled throughout the program and presentation. If you wish to raise a question or comment, you may do so during the open forum. You can also write your question in the Q&A or chat box, including your name and affiliation. Attendees are invited to fill out the evaluation forms, which will be posted in the chat box at the end of the session. The evaluation forms will be the basis of the issuance of certificates of participation. We now wish to call on the Philippine Ambassador to Mexico, Her Excellency Lilibet Deapera, to give the welcome remarks.
Hello. Good evening, good morning to all of you, to all our participants present in this event, including those who are joining us via YouTube channel, our YouTube channel, the Embassy's YouTube channel. And of course, on behalf of the Embassy of the Philippines in Mexico, allow me to express my sincerest gratitude to our distinguished guest speaker for the second episode of La Historia Olvidada, Filipinas-Mexico 2023. I met Dr. Cuauhtemoc Villamar when I first was assigned in Mexico. And at the time, he was still with the diplomatic service. So I'm sure he continued studying the relations between the Philippines and Mexico. And this time, we will be talking about Mexico and the Philippines during the Baroque era. I would like also to extend my appreciation to our co-organizers of this virtual colloquium series, Dr. Tomas Calvillo of El Colegio de San Luis, Dr. Crystal Obispado of the University of the Philippines, who will be our moderator, and Dr. Ivan Valdez Bubnov of the Philippine-Mexico Studies Program of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. Without further ado, let me give the floor to Dr. Cuauhtemoc Villamar. Magandang hapon po ulit, magandang gabi, magandang umaga.
Thank you, Ambassador Deapera. But before Dr. Cuauhtemoc starts his presentation, we want to acknowledge the presence of our distinguished guests who are in attendance at the Zoom meeting. Ambassador Oscar Lorenzo Arnold of Belize, Honorary Consul General Limuel Villalobos de Dulo of the Dominican Republic, Honorary Consul Mario de la O of Acapulco, Honorary Consul Francisco Eduardo Q. Perez of Monterrey, Second Secretary and Consul Benins Alan Carillo of China, Attaché Ethel Jane Pascua Molina of India, Attaché Myla Martinez Perez of Brunei, Attaché Alexander Araque Hugo of Jakarta, Advisor Edwin Bolastig of the World Health Organization. Of course, we have here Dr. Ivan Valdez Bubnov, one of the coordinators, alongside Vice Consul Marisol Winkler of the Philippine-Mexico Studies Program, Dr. Roberto Junco of El Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, o INA, Dr. Jorge Bayona of El Colegio de Mexico, Director Irma Dulhelby of Museo Asegurador Mexicano, Alfonso Espinosa Estrada of Tourism, Director Montserrat Morales Ramirez of Tourism, Dean April Farrell Murallon, Relacion of Misamis University, Dean Silva Nilson Aviles of the National University of Laguna. To our colleagues, teachers, and students from the Philippines and abroad, thank you so much for accompanying us today. We would like to reiterate that this lecture series is free and open to everyone interested in learning about the Philippine-Mexico and the more extensive Asia-Latin American relations. Last month, Dr. Dr. Paulina Machuca of La Universidad de Michoacán gave us an overview of the 5 centuries of Philippine-Mexico ties and how the two countries continuously influence each other in everyday life. For the second lecture, we are fortunate to have Dr. Cuauhtemoc Villamor, who will discuss a more specific topic, Mexico and the Philippines during the Baroque era. Dr. Villamor is a Mexican diplomat, economist, and historian. He's a retired career diplomat from the Mexican Foreign Service who served for 3 decades, primarily in Asia. He was posted twice in China, Singapore, Thailand, and Canada, specializing in economic and cultural promotion and technical cooperation. He finished his PhD in history from the National University of Singapore, with his dissertation focused on the network of Portuguese merchants that played a crucial role in creating the commercial system known as the Manila Galleon, 1565 to 1600. Since 2009, Dr. Villamor has been writing a blog about the Manila Galleon and the history of mutual cultural influences between Asia and the Americas. The name is Lanao Va, no, or the ship goes. Dr. Villamor is married to Mrs. Netnapit Tasacorn and has 2 children. Let's all give a round of applause to Dr. Cuauhtemoc Villamor.
Thank you very much, Cristil. I think it's the first time we see face to face, although we have been collaborating for so long time, and I think in a fruitful way. And thank you, Ambassador Lilibet Rapera, to remind that we met the first time in Mexico, exactly when you were posted the first time at the Philippine Embassy. Thank you to all of you for being this afternoon. Many good friends, many people that I read and we talked through internet. And it's so interesting because we are creating somehow a network of people interested in the history, in the different explorations about the thick history between between the Philippines and Mexico. A history that I don't think is forgotten, by the way. I think has accumulated so much information that we need to process in such a way to try to understand from different approaches this complex reality of the Manila Galleon, the formation period of several societies in Latin America, now called Latin America, but originally called Americas, in Asia that also lived turbulent and difficult times for a long time. And now we are in a different stage. So we have time and new tools to understand the history and interpret in better ways that complexity. And this is the purpose of this presentation. That is somehow a proposal to everybody to try to see the Manila Galleon from a little bit different perspective. Not so much in the way that before was emphasized on the economic terms, let's say in the last 30 years or a little bit more, in which most of the interpretations were merely economical, neither in the sense of previous histories were mostly in the missional task of the different missionary groups, Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits in the Philippines. But try to understand from a point of view, from a perspective that includes more the mechanics of culture. And culture itself, the cultural analysis also have been changing in recent decades. So if we grasp some of these concepts, we can enter into this knowledge about the Manila Galleon that is extremely rich, extremely has a lot of varieties, and this is the proposal. First of all, so I think if we put the first screen,
we share
the
his
name
slides?
of the Yes, please. Uh-huh. Okay. So the next is the outline of what I want to talk today, and is most okay. Um, I would like that we ask each other. We think about what is Baroque. Is an outdated topic? Is something that is exquisite only for experts on art, or is more, something more? I would like to propose this other element, other approach. And how this second element, how this phenomena of the Baroque and the globalization that has been represented by the Manila Galleon itself as the vehicle of communication through the Pacific, across the Pacific between America and Asia, dominated by the Spanish Empire. It includes also cultural elements, or mostly cultural elements. That's part of the proposal. So the role of the Manila Galleon is vital, is central in this cultural process, this cultural change. The third element that I want to touch upon is the Asian influence in the American societies, something that different analysts for several decades have been accumulating information, data, very rich knowledge about bits and pieces of the Asian influence in the material culture in Latin America or in Americas. But what about if this material culture had more than that? Certain influence in the way of life of many of the Latin American populations, particularly the Creole, but also the indigenous people in the continent. I will not insist much on the influence that the Manila Galleon has had in Europe, for example, because this is a large topic, although it will be some elements of information. But mostly these connections across the Pacific between, let's start, Manila and Acapulco, but it's larger than that. And we can end it with some conclusions that probably everybody can help also to participate in terms of there is more, there are new ways to understand this phenomena. I think so, and the proposal is precisely that. Next. Let's start by the concept itself of the Baroque. There are three pictures there, three images that describe the classic interpretation of the Baroque. Even classic is wrong. The conceptual interpretation of Baroque that it started in the 19th century. That means the people living in the Baroque never call it themselves Barockians, Baroques. It was not the time of the Baroque. It is a concept created later on in the 19th century that dominated the interpretation during the 20th century. And even today, we use the concept of Baroque that is more consolidated and more, it has many new elements, especially in the social transformation and cultural change. So the first time that was called Baroque is in the 19th century by Jacob Boucher. It's basically the idea that in a cycle of styles, art styles in Europe, is the end of the Renaissance and the beginning of something new. This something new was called Baroque. Next. However, please, the concept of Baroque was considered negative, something that is not accomplished, that is not complete, that is a faux pas, something that in reality was a decadent way of art after the classicism, the Renaissance, and the idea of the appreciation of the perfect forms of the society, of the art. Please, next. what authors like Ernest Weisbach introduced with more precision is what exactly is the Baroque? It was a proposal of the power dominating Europe, mostly in the confrontation with the Protestant cultural religious proposal of the time of Luther, and the response of the Catholic Church, the papacy, against this uprising. It's fascinating, that period, because it's the time in which there is the discovery of America, so-called discovery of America, 1492, but the emergence of the Protestant proposals criticizing the abuses or the extreme power of the papacy create the counter-reaction, the opposal, the idea that it's necessary to put together all the forces of the churches, Catholic, in order to face the uprisal of the Protestants. That's why it's called counter-reform. It's an important response of the Catholic empire, particularly Spain, but in whole Europe, the idea of the leader should be the Pope, and the only religion available possible is the Roman Catholic in the most orthodox way. This is very important. These elements were discussed along basically 20 years in the so-called Council of Trent. That is like a colloquium of the priests, the religious authorities, and also the empire leaders in order to respond to the Protestants. This counter-reform had issued guidelines on art and literature and many other elements of culture, led by Charles Borromeo. But among these, a very important element that derived from the Council of Trento was precisely the creation of the Company of Jesus. That was the militant way to defend the papacy. Next. These elements, these guidelines, precisely propose orthodox ways of dealing with culture, of organizing societies. And what were these societies? Europe, of course, but also in America, also in Asia, that were recently occupied by the Spaniards. In that sense, the idea of Baroque became somehow ridiculed, considered a deformation, a deformity of the art, a deformity of the styles, of the beauty of the times of the Greeks and Romans, and all these elements that were highly appreciated in Europe. Instead, the proposal of the Baroque in the vision of the Catholic Church was the idea of the emotions, to show the religious emotions that comes from the images of the Virgin, of God in the cross, and the idea of enhancing the passion of the people towards the religion, to make more attractive, more deep emotion to the faith of Catholic faith. Next. So we have in that level two contradictory visions about the Baroque. One is the negative vision of the Baroque, and in the other, in the practical terms, the idea of striving for better, more efficient in terms of image, efficient ideas of what is the beauty of the art. We, in terms of interpretations, we can arrive into the 20th century when, with a different and very challenging opinion by people like Antonio Maradal or Spaniard, or Bolívar Echeverría, that was Ecuadorian and lived in Mexico and worked for many years. That is, Baroque is a social historical formation. So it's not only art style, it's a concept, a way of living, an ethos that has basically three characteristics. It's conservative, as we can see, because it came from a clash, cultural clash in Europe. It's conservative, reactionary, we can call. Comes from top down, is a proposal of the empire to the rest of the society. Is urban. This is very important, and we will see how. Urban, that means, is the representation of the society of the 16th century, in which new cities and a grouping of people living together in cities changed the face of the planet. In Asia, that was Southeast Asia was one of the most organized in terms of port cities. I talk about this in another presentation. It was representation of this idea, urban societies. Urban societies like in Mexico or in Peru too. And the discovery of this element was central for the proposal of the Baroque. And the other element, the third element, is that it's massive. It's not only the scattered societies that lives in helmets in hamlets in Europe, as has been also described, but it's in general the idea of massive societies, authoritarian, top-down, is urban, and is massive. The proposal of Bolívar Echeverría, that is composed by several studies, is that idea of the Spanish Empire, European Catholic Empire, let's say, was the proposal of modernity of the time. It's an idea of organizing the world, not only Europe, not only America, not only Asia. Okay. Can you listen to me? Yeah. So the idea is a proposal of modernization of the world. Is the idea of integrating culturally the world. It was a proposal, achieved many of the elements, and in terms of other authors, it's very important to know that achieve many of the goals, the targets of integrating different societies culturally. It was a modernity in that style 4 centuries ago, but also has had failures, problems, and the emergence of other proposals of modernity, mostly Anglo-Saxon, different ideas of development, cultural development that are different from the Christian Catholic, Roman Catholic proposal. So this idea of modernization 400 years ago, the Baroque, implies this common proposal. And we will see, next please, next image, we can see that this, one more, that this proposal managed to put together different societies with different origins, with several, is after Bolívar Echeverría, different proposals, different societies receiving this interpretation of the religion, of the way of life, organizing society, etc. They had also a response, as naturally all human ideas have responses, have resistance, resilience, and they became different ways of interpreting the world. And this is also the beauty of the time, of the beauty of the proposal, because we have, yeah, next, 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 next. So this idea of unifying the world around the Catholic faith was one proposal, but they turned into different expressions, a variety of expressions, all of them under the umbrella of Baroque. And I want to show you next the idea of how the cultural clash existed for over 2 centuries, precisely in the moment in which Manila was founded. And the reference from the economic point of view is very important, but the cultural point of view is equally important. So 1571, the foundation of Manila was the symbolically the arrival of silver from America into Asia. That's not exactly true, because the silver arrived from Japan, from other places, and the trade was very intense in Asia. But establishing Manila in 1571 and establishing the connection with the American societies producing silver was very important. Next, then it was the opportunity establishment of Manila. It was the springboard to propose the Catholic Baroque initiative into Asia, into the different places, starting by Philippines. So among these militant forces, these organizations with a clear objective, how to expand the Catholic principles, cultural principles discussed in Europe during the Council of Trento, is precisely the Jesuit Company. And I will mention other congregations that were equally important in different forms. That start the complexity, because there are different ways of interpreting the cultural elements of Asia and the Americas. The Jesuit Company had a nature of a militant or even military organization. So it's Compañía de Jesús, that indicates some elements of army, of war, and clash. This is essentially one of the elements. And the level of discipline of the members of the Jesuits precisely was one of the characteristics of the counter-reform in Asia, as we can see specifically in Japan and China, where they had some level of success. The other congregations, Dominican, Augustinians, Franciscans, had other approach to the same idea of the counter-reform, and they applied part of these proposals mostly in the Philippines, and later on in some other parts of Southeast Asia. Can we pass to the next? So we can arrive to one of the elements of this proposal. The Baroque became a global cultural expression of the empire, Catholic Roman Empire, that was represented by the crown of Castilla, and had branches in that sense all over in Europe and Americas and in Asia. It was the most powerful empire at that time, and probably one of the largest in the history, with a cultural proposal, that is globalization around the Roman Catholic faith. Can we pass to the next? I was telling you about the differences and the commonalities of the cultural response. Okay, it's a faith, it's a Roman Catholic faith, the true religion against the Protestants, against the Lutherans, against against the Calvinists, etc. It should have a model. And this model was so ambitious, so large, so rich, that in one moment they understood the different groups, levels of the religion, the Catholic religion, that need to negotiate, need to establish forms of interpretation of the religion, of the art in different places in the world. This is an example that is in Mexico, near Puebla, that is called Tonancintla. Santa Maria Tonancintla is one of the first and most rich expressions of indigenous art. The art creators of this were mostly indigenous people that received the religious education, Catholic education, and they were allowed to decorate the church that in essence was in a place that was mostly the religious place before the Spaniards, but then with a church Spanish style, they create and decorate the different religious scenes in the with many indigenous elements, mostly fruits, flowers, angels that are more similar to the indigenous features, and all of them in a very rich, in an explosive way of beauty and creativity. The indigenous people took the challenge of creating their own church in this way. Unfortunately, the images are not so good, but I think it gives the picture of what was that proposal, that it was incredible rich, and implies, indicates an accommodation of the top-down proposals coming from Rome, from Madrid, Sevilla, the aesthetic proposals coming into Mexico as a form of putting together two different cultures. Next, please, the next. This is another example. Far away is the parish of Santo Tomás de Villanueva in Bolivia. Also, is a religious, indigenous expression of the Baroque art in hands of masters of the stone carving. Incredibly rich, fantastic creativity is the interpretation, the indigenous interpretation of the Baroque. 5,000 kilometers away from Mexico or from Spain. This creation is another expression. As you can see, the form, the idea, the rituals are Catholic, but also represents the images, the ethos, the way of interpreting the life by indigenous people in Bolivia. There are many other expressions in South America that are extremely rich, that are also a mix of culture, always under the canons of religion, Catholic religion. They should follow the standard, but they express in different way. Can we pass to the next? Sorry. This is San Lorenzo de Carangas in Potosí, in Bolivia. Sorry. We pass to the next, and we can see, next, please. Can we see the next, please? We will see the church of Miagao in Iloilo, Philippines. Can we pass to the next?
The
I
church of
have the
okay. I think Doctor, this is the church of Miao Miao.
no this
Tagaw.
no this is the San Lorenzo de Carangas in Potosí,
Ah,
Bolivia. This is
okay,
Bolivia.
sorry.
So I want to show the next that is precisely in Miagao, in Iloilo. But please, can you pass the next screen? I had the fortune to visit different places, different churches in Luzon, in which I saw the beauties of the Baroque expressions, also with the interpretation of the Filipino people, and the solution of many complicated elements like the earthquakes in the Philippines. Therefore, in terms of architecture, the separation of the bell tower from the church, and then the decorations also according to the local interpretation. Can we pass the next, please? I don't know why it's not the screen of Miagao. Okay. So, the thing is, down. Yes. Next and next. It doesn't react.
Yeah. Excuse me, Dr. Kautemok. Actually, the 13th slide is the picture of Miagao. So can we just project the 13th slide? That's Miagao.
Yes, please. Yes. The 13th. Okay. That one more time. The thing here is exactly that one. One more time here. We have different local interpretations of the religion, the proposal that insists top down, but in this case is representing the reality of a tropical country. In stone, the style can be barely plateresco, can be essentially the same as in Spain or Bolivia or in Mexico, but is properly Filipino. And this is part of the richness of this Baroque interpretation. Who did this beautiful workmanship? Basically, indigenous people with a high level of art creativity. And in this case, this is one of the examples of the local solutions, as I say, and you can see in different churches from North Luzon to the different places in the Philippines, churches with this solution that somebody called the telluric Baroque. That means churches that can stand even with the terrible earthquakes that happen in the Philippines. And this is, again, a different solution. And these three examples lead us into brief conclusion, pre-conclusion. That is, we have a variety of options, solutions, responses to the proposal of a global centralized Baroque, global centralized religion interpretation. There are many others, and there are many other elements to interpret this that comes not exactly from the political side, the economic side, but we are talking about a very dynamic cultural environment that precisely because it's so extended empire touch upon populations all over in the world. Basically, even in Africa, there are expressions of the Baroque. So next, please. Please, next. This idea, the expansion of the Baroque, generate different interpretations. Now we have the essential proposal, but then the variety of creativities, expressions in different areas, architecture, fashion, music, fantastic idea of the music, the urban design. I don't have a musical example, but you can see the similarities that exist between Philippines and Mexico in terms of music that also is a response of the local population to the idea of uniformity coming from the church, mostly the mass and the choirs and the instruments proposed, European instruments, and how everything derived in different forms. I just can imagine the bamboo organ in in Manila. That is a fantastic expression of local response to the proposal of the Baroque, but also the different levels of organs, musical organs in Oaxaca, in Puebla, in Mexico City, that also create their own Baroque. And inevitably, we need to mention Bolivia, in which indigenous people create operas, Baroque operas, with in the local languages. Catholic operas like San Ignacio de Loyola is an opera created in Chiquitos in Bolivia. This is among many other examples, and we will explore a little bit more. Can we pass to the next? Then, if we make a quick assessment, the Manila Galleon was the main global link among many cultures, many different connections. And I must insist, Manila was the fulcrum, the spark of connections in Southeast Asia and in the Americas. Manila was an important connection with Southeast Asia before the Spaniards. We can see Luzon people living in Malacca in the 14th century, the 15th century. We can see traders from all over coming into Luzon in order to trade from China to the Spice Islands. Malay people also crossing all the way to Luzon before the Spaniards. But in the moment in which the Spaniards arrived, the connections became even more complex, more elaborate. And this is the importance of that foundation of Manila. And the following centuries, the next centuries, were able to mix these elements plus the American elements. Somehow, and this is a discussion among important intellectuals in the Philippines, how Philippines is not a mestizo culture. It's a global culture that wave the connections among different cultures. And I will say in a master way, in one of the most refined ways of cultural connections that happen, and we will see a little bit more next. Please, can we see the, So the connection, I will not repeat again about the Manila Galleon. This is specifically about the Baroque culture. The Manila Galleon was that point, that link, that vehicle of connection between the Americas, Europe, and Asia. and Manila became one of the most cosmopolitan cities, small, with difficulties, with authoritarian ruling, with influence that clashed in many ways, under a permanent tension that explode also in very negative ways, particularly during the uprising of the Chinese and the killing of many members of the Chinese community in different moments along the 17th century, a tension that make create panic among the few Spaniards living, Castilians living there, about the potential invasion of the Japanese or the Chinese pirates or the Dutch or the British entering into the Manila. It was a city full of tension, a city full of creativity. And this is one of the elements of this period. Can we pass to the next? I just passed through this represented basically 250 years, the connection between Manila and Acapulco, time enough to observe the cultural change that happened. And this period historically is considered Baroque. This is, let's say, the demonstration of the Baroque period, the one that came together with the Manila trade. And even the Manila trade had some Baroque interpretations, because the dominant view in economic terms it was the mercantilism, the idea of accumulating metal, that is silver or gold, and the trade as a mean of getting rich. This is an economic school, and I'm not going further on this element, but it's part of a large continent of interpretations. We go back to the idea of can we pass to the next, please? The idea of the type of system in which we were working during this time. Can we pass to the next? Yeah, so this is the period and the element that we want to sustain, that it was a cultural proposal for dominating that period that was absorbed by the different populations and expressed in different ways. And it was a proposal large enough to influence large part of the global population in different continents, and probably it was up to now one of the largest and most significant cultural expressions of the time. Can we pass to the next, please? Always I sustain, and I will insist a little bit on this, the Manila Galleon was not a spontaneous system, as many people said, especially the interpretation in English, that the Manila Galleon was an anarchist system, outdated, a system that didn't show any level of modernity. On the contrary, the Manila Galleon had a system in which there were rules, regulations since 1593, in which it was clearly expressed that guarantee the legality of transactions. The crown guarantee also the predictability of the transportation. There were always two galleons crossing, even in the moments in which there were many difficulties in terms of navigation or the wars in certain parts, and they didn't allow the arrival of products, but it was always the moving of the galleon. The years in which the galleon didn't arrive, for example, to the Philippines, it was a disgrace for the 1 or 2 years, following years, because it was so important for the trade of thousands of people. And it's a system that has self-defense, that galleons had cannons, had systems of protection, even it was piracy in certain parts, or openly the attack from the enemies of the Spanish Empire. Can we pass to the next? I will just mention that together with the movement of beautiful high-end products like textiles, porcelains, lacquers, ivory, furniture, that per se has cultural elements, obviously. Also, it was a phenomena of adaptation and integration of different common culture, like the way of eating the food, the preparation of the food, the arrival of agricultural products back and forth from America to Asia, from Asia to America. This mix, this mingle of different cultures at the bottom, at the local level, was extremely important for both cultures in America and in Asia, and transform into cultural habits. So far that one of the foods that are so popular in the world, like chocolate, original from Central America, enter into all the globe as one of the most satisfying and delicious things that arrive into the European court, in all the houses in America and in Asia also. So elements like this, or the chile, or the potato, on the opposite side, certain products that come from Asia that became part of the rice, particularly the rice that some people discuss that probably is from Africa, the one arriving into Mexico, but the cultivation certainly is from the Filipinos in Guerrero, Mexico, demonstrated. So the galleon is not only high-end products, merchandise, and ivories, etc., but also cultural expressions in the everyday life, like the food and agriculture. Can we pass to the next? So one example of this is precisely the idea that it was, in one side, the intention to propose the idea of the dominant culture, let's call now Baroque, by the upper end, the top end of the society, administrators of the empire, promoting a certain culture, but also the transference of that culture into the large parts of the population that also absorb part of this change. I'm going to mention, please, the next, the case of one bishop of Spain arriving into Mexico, but it's little known that he was one of the most important promoters of the Catholic religion, of course a bishop, but in the Baroque style. And it was fundamental in the interpretation of the role of Asia in Mexico, in America. He was member of the Council of Indies, very young, during 20 years. That means he received all the documentation arriving from the Philippines into the Council of Indies in Spain, including some proposals to withdraw from the Philippines, to attack Macau, to attack China, etc. And he controlled or interpret this in different way. He supported the idea to keep the the Philippines into the Spanish Empire. He was an administrator, knowing day by day, every time that the letters arrived, what were the main concerns in the Philippines. And he was one person that, when he was sent into Mexico in 1539, something like this, he arrived into Mexico with complete knowledge of the problems existing in Asia, America, and Europe. He was protected by the king, and he had a project, a proposal. He became Bishop of Puebla during 15 years. Oh, okay. And it was important that he became also briefly Viceroy of Mexico. He was, can we pass to the next? He was so knowledgeable about the realities in the 3 continents that he managed to write a fabulous history of the fall of the Ming Dynasty, with all the details, like news, CNN news, about what was happening in China. And he reported that to the crown. But then after his report became a book that was one of the important descriptions of the changes in China. His proposal was essentially to announce, advert to the crown in Spain, the idea of, can we pass to the next? The idea that a wrong change in the policies can derail the empire, even powerful empires like the Chinese empire. This was his proposal. This was his interest to demonstrate from the viewpoint, from the vantage point of Mexico. He was observing Asia, China, and reporting to Spain. This is unique, really. Then he faced next also the different point of views, and he considered, can we see the next, please? And he considered incorrect the way the Jesuits were dealing with China and Japan. So he participated in the controversy against the Jesuits about the style of the Jesuits dealing with for example, with Confucius, with the different religious procedures in China and in Japan. Remember that Japan closed the relation with all Catholic presence in the 3rd decade. Well, just 2 more images, the next and the next, in which we can see he brought one of the largest libraries, his personal library, that still exists in Puebla, and is one of the most beautiful Baroque expressions precisely of a Baroque library. And he rushed to build and consecrate the Cathedral of Puebla, that is Baroque, but in the modern Baroque, like Herrera style. That is just simply the blueprint of Spain and built in Mexico. Even has some problems in terms of orientation, etc. But this is the style, the empire style of the Baroque in Mexico. Just briefly, I want to give some examples of how the products arriving from Philippines, from all over in Asia, going into Mexico, create also an environment, a cultural environment, an interpretation of the reality into America. So we have Asian objects that create, can we pass quickly the next 3? The textiles, for example, the silk from China, or sometimes also from other places, Siam, Thailand, that arrive into America. And the people enjoyed this. The upper class enjoyed so much the silk and the embroideries, etc. Can we pass? That in one element, in one point, they start using the same with the European models, fashion models. The idea of using screens to the so-called biombo, Chinese style, but in Mexico, in Peru, in different parts. Can we pass? So the idea was mostly the upper class able to buy expensive lacquers, ivories, etc., and silk. But then after, it happens in economic terms that the prices were so competitive by the Manila Galleon that the people, lower class, was able to buy silk or use some ornaments similar to the Asians into the local fashion. Can we pass the next? That is precisely a phenomena of adaptation, adoption of the other forms, and adaptation. This is a Mexican China poblana dress from this photo, or this example is from last century, around 1940, and it shows the idea of the popular class, indigenous people, adapting the way of the fashion of the upper class with the Asian style. And this is the national dress of Mexico nowadays, by the way. Next. The same happened with different variety of products like these porcelains from Asia, in this case, probably from China. Next, that became part of the production, copy, and transformation of the porcelains, and in this case, clay in Puebla, again, Mexican Talavera, that is appreciated. And I will finish with this. The Manila became, I insist, and I will insist constantly, became a hub, a center of trade. Can we pass the next? A center of the production, the trade, but also production of culture. And in this case, one very refined way of creation was precisely the religious images in ivory. Ivory that probably came from Africa or India, the tusk. Probably they were carved initially in China, in the southern coast of China, but the final touches were made in the Philippines. And the studies show how, for example, some elements like the dresses in ivory of the Virgin in the right hand has elements of the Indian sari. And the eyes of these saints are mostly Asian. There are interpretations that the Jesus in the cross facing down is a Mexican interpretation of Jesus. Jesus is defeated, not talking to the Father in heaven and saying his last words, but already defeated. And this is somehow Mexican interpretation. Please, can you pass quickly the others? The production, one more. That is, the production of ivories was a real industrious, not industrial, industrious creativity, creation, in which hands and heads in ivory created by Sangleys and others in the Philippines spread all over in the Catholic Empire, from America, Europe, etc. It was an industry. Industrious, that means it's not a factory. There were many ateliers that produced these things. And this is from Sevilla. But you can see these images in Spain, in Germany, in Bolivia, in Argentina, in Mexico. And this is result of the creativity of the Philippines. Last, the next image, I want to show the next image, photo. This is the market in Mexico City called El Parian. For the Filipinos, will be very, it's a name that you immediately recognize. It's in the main square in Mexico. El Parian was the market for Asian products for almost 200 years. It was so important, the arrival of porcelains, ivories, silk in Mexico, that it was the most bustling, most active market in Mexico City and in the country. It was ended, demolished around 1820, but there are stories about this market in which there were all the riches of Orient. I will end here, essentially, with the, can we pass to the last image? With the intention, with the idea of carving with you some of the conclusions, essentially, how the Baroque exists, is culture, but is a proposal of globalization, modernity. Second, it was a response of different levels of the society that create also their own forms, their own expressions. And this is extremely valuable for our time because we are also a result of this cultural connection. And I would mention that all of this create a complex system that still exists even, and this is for another proposal, another presentation, is connected to the political systems, to our way of facing the reality that is different from other societies, especially the Anglo-Saxon societies. We will another day understand also the use of the language, the Spanish language, our own interpretation of the religion that is also has a common origin. And in the end, the reality is all of this is Baroque and is Manila Galleon. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Villamor, for the fascinating and enriching lecture. We see how the Spanish monarchy used Baroque as a way to bring together various parts of its large and diverse territories, primarily by sending missionaries to spread the religion and by building churches and other fancy buildings. This Baroque style, as we've seen in his lecture, permitted the material culture in Asia and America. He also tackled how the galleon system brought people from different cultures, including Chinese, merchants, and religious leaders like Bishop Juan de Palafox. We can now proceed to question and answer. If you have a question or comment, you can use Zoom's question and answer or chat function or Zoom's raise hand function. We kindly request you to state your name and affiliation. I think we can start with Ignacio Nieto Duarte.
Thank you so much. Good evening there. No, good morning there. Good evening here in Mexico. Doctor Villamar, muchas gracias por la presentación. Fue fascinante. You made me remember actually a lot from my own schooling, my years in the university, the bachelor's degree, particularly the art history classes. Especialmente cuando no podían encontrar la imagen de la iglesia de Ilolo, pero bueno, esa es otra historia. You also made me remember the thesis of Rafael Bernal about transculturation. I am sure you are familiar with it. and the words
Sure.
of Quilis, Antonio Quilis, in regards to the Spanish language in Philippines. I know this might be a subject for another conference, but if you have something very quick, very small to say about the Spanish language, about perhaps the literature, if you may, and during this time, of course, of the Baroque in the Philippines. Sorry, I forgot to mention my affiliation. I don't have a current affiliation. I am just an independent student.
Great. Thank you so much for your question. Very interesting. And it's a continent, complete interpretation. Just a bit of information. Can you imagine that the certain sonnets of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz were months after being issued, were read in Manila? So Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is part the literature of Sor Juana, the most important poet of the Baroque in Mexico, was part of the Filipino literature in Spanish. We are talking about 200 years ago, 250 years ago. The popular songs, as you remind, popular songs in the Philippines were originally Mexicans or related to the Mexican missionaries. Los padres de San Francisco han sembrado un camotal. ¿Qué padres tan inocentes? ¿Qué camotes han de dar? This is from Philippines. And there are many other elements, dozens of examples of the connection through the language and the literature. I would like to refer to Vicente Rafael as one of the most refined interpreters of these elements of the language as a zone of a struggle, cultural struggle between the locals and the language of the empire. The same happened in Mexico, in which, or in South America, in which the language, the absorbed language of the Spaniards was transformed for local purposes. The same happened in the Philippines. Nowadays, we know much more about the limited extension of the empire in different liminal areas in the Philippines or in other places. Yes, I will insist that there is a transformation of the culture, and this was enrichment at the same time.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias, doctor.
We will now read some of the questions sent to us. How unique is Filipino-Mexico relations compared to the other relations between Asian and Latin American countries? I will repeat the question. How unique is
Yes. I think I don't want to fall in absolutes, but one important element is the migration, that Cristil is an expert on that, of the Filipinos into Mexico, and the connection of these Filipinos in Mexico that mingle among the indigenous people and became part of Mexico for natural reasons. One is that they were, when they arrived in the Manila galleon as sailors or prisoners, etc., they were already Catholic. They already spoke some Spanish, and they were integrated into the Mexican culture relatively easy. Second, they were able to marry indigenous women. Most of the passengers were men and married indigenous people and women in indigenous community that had an advantage. They didn't pay tribute. So they were able to sustain themselves and survive in the provinces in Mexico, from Colima to Oaxaca, and we don't have a trace. Maybe a genetic analysis will show us how many Filipinos, or in which way the Filipinos mingle into the Mexican culture. So we know it's deep, we know it's rich, the connection. But there are many others, and perhaps after the galleons, as one of your historians said, after the galleons, the connection between Asia and Mexico is incredibly large. Chinese, Japanese, and Indonesians, people from other parts of Southeast Asia enter into the Mexican societies in different ways. But the Filipinos and the Mexicans share a common culture. Frankly, 250 years is quite important time for both cultures. Boys?
Still you're mute.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Kwao. Well, I think we can call on Deo Cruzada since he's raising his hand. Deo, please introduce yourself.
Okay, sorry, hello. So I'm Deo Cruzada. I don't have a formal academic affiliation, but I graduated AB History, De La Salle University. And I'd like to say first that this lecture reminded me of the days, well, just a few months ago when I worked as a tour guide in the Intramuros administration. And as part of my job, I always visited the San Agustin Church. And the San Agustin Church, what we are told is that the style of Baroque was a sort of social control, as you said, but it was specified that it was meant to be this full display of the glory of God in response to the more austere Protestant style of church decoration. But one other thing that I noticed in the San Agustin Church that's very unique to it is the front of it, right? I'm sure you've seen this before, that there are two Chinese guardian lions in front of the church, shisas in Chinese. And so that actually leads to the question I want to ask you, Professor. What is there any like reaction or formal ways of handling those who integrate their faith, other faiths into the church design? Because you mentioned that the Baroque is a very strictly defined set of rules. That is then filled in by nature.
Yes, and thank you for your question, Leo. There are architects studying precisely the roots, the designs, the elements that exist in both societies or across the Pacific. And they use, for example, of the tejados, the roof, that in a way were originally from Tlaxcala, and it's clay in certain way put in the ceilings and the roofs, probably by indigenous of Mexico in Guam and in the Philippines. So the reconstruction of certain parts of in Guam and in the Philippines have been made by one Mexican architect that is very knowledgeable about this history and try to reconstruct in that way. Another architect that is expert on these elements is from Spain, and he discovered incredible elements of the Chinese, for example, in churches, and the solutions, architectural solutions in the connection between roof and walls. This is an incredible way. Or the protection against the heat. That is, it comes also from the Chinese tradition, because the labor came in some moments from the Chinese, the Sangley, in the Philippines. At the same time, certain ways of producing rice in Mexico, or the workmanship of the Filipinos in Mexico also can be seen. There is a question here, for example, about the mezcal. Mezcal, I don't think is Baroque, but anyway, it's a cultural connection, no doubt, between the both societies. And my friend also have different studies, very deep studies about this connection between the distillation in the Philippines and in Mexico. and so on. There are hundreds of examples. We are talking about a deep root together. And this is extremely important to put in the face of the world how we come from a rich tradition, and we are rich in terms of culture, and we are not a mixed. We are not like somebody say very horrible, but like a street dogs mixed. No, we are a rich culture. We have a rich culture, both of or several societies coming from that root. We have a rich culture and complex. Sorry.
Due to limited time, we can only accommodate one last question. We actually received a lot of questions, but if there's no question from the attendees right now, I will read some of the questions we received earlier. Okay, so this question, we usually encounter this question in any conference regarding the Philippine-Mexico ties. This is the question: are Filipinos more Latino than Asian?
Well, this is an slogan, and it's correct. But the Filipinos are Filipinos, and there is another academics that said once the Filipinos became so globalized, became more Asians, because became so connected and so important in the trade routes of Southeast Asia and China and Japan, that they became even more Asians. Of course, with the input of the Latino and the language, but Philippines is outstanding in that mix of cultures. Mix that I insist is a rich connection. More Filipinos, more Asian, more Latinos. You are outstanding in terms of societies and culture.
We thank you once again, Dr. Villamar, for generously accepting our invitation to give a lecture at 7 o'clock in the morning. We are grateful, and we hope we can continuously collaborate in the future. I think we can take, can the participants turn on their camera so we can take a picture, like sort of class picture? Yeah. Someone from the embassy will screenshot, no? Or I will do it.
Okay, let's go. Page 1. Next. Okay, one last. Okay, one more. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone. We already posted in the chat box the link for your attendance, and please don't miss the next episode of La Historia Olvidada with Maestra Maricruz Pisa Lopez with the topic Southeast Asian cuisine on the Costa Grande of Guerrero. It's scheduled on December 19, 6:30 to 8 p.m. Mexico time, December 20, 8:30 to 10 a.m. Manila time. Thank you, and see you next month.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, good morning, good afternoon.
Good night, good morning in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Villamar.
Thank you, Dr. Villamar.
Participants.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you, Dr. Crystal. Kamusta ka dyan? Thank you, Ms. Paula. You are here.
See you again next month.
Yes.
Bye.